Right. So, welcome to Self Love Revolution for February 12th. I am Megan Smith Brooks, and I am a guest teacher for Mia Sains. And thank you so much, Mia, for inviting me. I really am grateful for connecting with your tribe, your community, and being able to share what my passion and my work has become. So, um, I am an ordained unity minister. I have 25 years experience in spiritual education, and I am now a certified grief coach, author of Unraveling Grief, a mother's spiritual journey of healing and discovery, which is where I'm going to be drawing material that we talk about today. And also, I do guest speaking and facilitate retreat, healing and transformational retreats with the fabulous partner, Terry Welder, who I hope I can invite to join us next month. So, I want to just start with a little bit of what my story is and why it is that I um, have personal experience about what I'm going to be talking about today, which is the pitfalls of grief. How do we get out of those pitfalls? And what can we learn from them? How can we transform our lives and understanding how unresolved grief is affecting us? We've all had the experience of pain and loss in life if we're human, if we're breathing, if we're, old enough to speak and talk and walk. It's a part of our life experience. And yet, in our society, we don't do a very good job of talking about it, of recognizing the value of it, of what we can learn from it, and how to navigate it and somehow come through it to thrive, to find renewed meaning and purpose in life, to use the gifts that are really being offered within the, the process of grief. I have come to understand that grief is our teacher. And the value is only realized when we have the courage to go deep into feeling it, to heal it, which is what we're going to do more next month, is to that deep process. Because I want to start with building the foundation today. And so my real grief journey started in 2013. I have been blessed to have two sons, and my second born son, Justin, was murdered in 2013 on May 30th, actually. I discovered that reality when I was arriving at baggage claim in Fort Lauderdale, Florida on June 7th. I had had my cell phone turned off all day. I turned it back on. I was arriving to join, I don't know if it's 500 or 600 other colleagues for a conference at sea. And was really looking forward to it. And I hadn't been able to reach my son. I wanted to let him know that I'd be at sea for 5 days and I wouldn't be able to be reached. We generally talked at least once a week, and I hadn't been able to reach him, and that concerned me. But I left him a message. Anyway, as soon as I arrived, I turned on my phone and it started ringing, and it was my firstborn son, Ryan, who was calling me from Seattle and saying, "Mom, are you sitting down?" And when somebody says something like that, you know that it's probably not welcome news. So, my response is, what, tell me what's going on. And he said, "I don't know how to say it, but Justin's gone." And my mind is like, "What do you mean he's gone?" He goes, "Mom, he's dead. His body was found in the river outside of Lee Summit in Missouri, which is where he was living. He had followed me when I went to Unity Village to participate in seminary when I was ordained, and he stayed there. So the shock hit me. And your mind goes immediately into denial that I didn't hear that. That couldn't possibly be true. It must be a mistake. And he's like, "No, Mom, they found his body in the river. He's gone." And that began a very long journey of navigating the intense, heart-wrenching experience of pain and loss and grief from the loss of my beautiful blue-eyed boy that had a contagious life and a passion for living. The first couple of months, I didn't feel like I was in my body. It was like I was knocked out and I was just going through slow motion, observing things. Maybe you've had that experience where pain is so intense, it's too much to take on. And I think that that is, from a spiritual perspective, it's what life offers us as a way to come to terms with accepting something that's mentally too hard to accept, to embrace, to process. And that as we have some time, that shock that has sort of given us this hug that holds on to us and gives us some foundation to support us gradually wears off. And then the intensity of that pain really hits us hard. For me, it was probably about 2 months later. And by then, I had started to get more details and facts about the situation. The detectives had called me and said, um, your son was murdered. This wasn't an accident. We found his body wrapped in a chain attached to a cinder block and believed that he'd been thrown off a bridge with the intention that his body wouldn't be found because the river emptied into a very deep lake. And he said, had his body made it to that place, we may never have found him. And that was my first realization of a sense of gratitude in the midst of pain. How grateful I was that I wasn't a parent that had to live for the rest of my life, never knowing what had happened to my child, knowing it probably wasn't a positive experience. And so, navigating that, I using my own spiritual practice, of which again I was grateful I had some foundation. I'd already been serving as a minister of spiritual community, serving and supporting others with challenges in their life. And yet there was a difference between having to actually apply it to myself rather than supporting someone else. And I began to observe the ways that people respond to grief and pain and loss and the discomfort that we have in general. We don't know what to say. We're not taught how to deal with it. And so, what I'd really like you to begin to understand is that the pain of loss in life is a part of our human experience. And the intensity of that pain is part of the full spectrum of the vibration of emotion in life. And so, we tend to, as human beings, want to gravitate to that high end of ecstasy and bliss and joy, and where everything is fabulous. We want to, that we think that's the ultimate goal. And yet, that same intensity of joy is the vibration of intensity in the pain of loss, the heart wrenching, excruciating pain of loss in life. And if we try to avoid it, if we try to hide from it, then we are setting ourselves up for more suffering. We are setting ourselves up for the negative results of not dealing with unresolved grief, because we're holding on to that energy, and it's going to have a toxic effect on our mind, body, soul, spirit connection, because we're all connected as one through the vibration of life. And our wholeness is when everything comes to balance. And so pain throws us way out of whack, way out of balance, right? So I can't see any of you. I know many of you are at work, so you can't turn on your volume. You're not going to be able to participate. But I hope that you recognizing that there is something that throws us out of balance that is painful, it's difficult, and it might even just be that we're triggered when we're carrying around unresolved grief by watching what's happening on the news. This past year, we have been in a global pandemic, but also in a global experience of the trauma of grief and pain and loss. That we're all collectively, maybe for the first time we've ever realized, being triggered by pain and loss. And so when we watch what's happening on the news, when we see that someone else has lost their life from COVID or some other horrendous experience, it affects us. It touches our soul. And if you're feeling that discord, if you're feeling out of balance, it's most likely because there's some unresolved grief that you have buried and have yet to deal with. And the thing about grief is that if we don't have the courage to go through it, we will never be able to heal it, to come out to the other side, to thrive. And I've come to understand that to thrive is another way of saying to be blessed. That when we feel blessed, we are thriving at a higher level in life. And so you can't um, crawl under grief. You can't, go around it. You can't avoid it. You have to go through it intentionally with courage and purpose and the realization that there is something of value for me to learn from this. That if I hadn't had this experience, perhaps maybe I would never have done deep enough to discover something of value within myself. Maybe you already have, but just didn't realize that it came from your experience of grief. So, some of the things that I wanted to talk about today, primarily focusing on the pitfalls of unresolved grief and the impact on our lives. And that if we don't notice that we've fallen into the pit, then we're going to be stuck in that place out of balance. And so we need to notice that that's what's happened so we know how to get out of the pit, right? But I want to first of all honor everyone with wherever you're at in the process of grief, of your experience in life, that there is no right way to grieve. It's personal and it's painful. And welcome, new person. Um, and it's important to acknowledge that we all have some energy of grief to process wherever we're at in life. It's an ongoing thing. And again, it's not something that you just um, have one big loss in your life and then you don't have to deal with it again. We all know it's like looking back, even when we're a child, maybe we lost a pet or a favorite broken toy. My first loss of a pet was my horse when a pasture mate kicked him and broke his back leg, and the vet had to put him down. And I was heartbroken. So, we all have those experiences. I lost my first grandparent when I was 7. I loved my papa, but I didn't understand how to process grief at that age. So, again, we haven't been taught that. My parents didn't know how to help their children with the loss of grief. And so my mother thought the best way was just to keep us out of the situation. We weren't taken to my papa's memorial service. There was very little conversation. It just Papa went to heaven. I didn't understand what that meant. And so years later, I had to process that. I have since lost both my grandmothers. My maternal grandfather died when my mother was young, so I never knew him. And I lost my father in 2007. But nothing as heart wrenching as the loss of my son through the violent act of murder in 2013. So I want you to know my heart is with you wherever you are in the role of pain and loss in life, and that there is some valuable tools and practices that can support you in navigating that with intention and awareness and courage, that also includes forgiveness and ultimately moving back into experiencing gratitude, the highest vibration of living. We can find that even in the midst of our pain. So you might want to think about some of your past situations that if we haven't dealt with them, they compound to a more traumatic loss. So when you have something significant, like when I lost my son, if I hadn't dealt with some of my previous grief, it would have compounded that and made it even more intense. So being aware of that, we recognize the value of processing grief so that it doesn't get magnified into a more traumatic and difficult and longer process of healing. So, do you think that you have unresolved grief impacting your life? Can you see how it may have shown up and impacted your health and wholeness? How is it showing up? I know a lot of you can't comment, but if you can, oh, here's somebody that said yes. Okay. If you want to unmute yourself and share, what you've been impacted from grief, it's valuable and helpful for others to hear what you have to say.
Hi.
Hi, Evelyn.
Thank you. Yeah, my grief is a loss of my family. When I was a child, I was placed in care and separated from my siblings. And I've had a lot of attachment and all those kind of things that, self-protection and survival. And then my brother, I was reconnected with my siblings, wonderful, like 11 years later. And but when he was diagnosed with terminal cancer, that was kind of the last final trauma of abandonment.
Yeah.
And that I couldn't help him because as a little boy, I was his caretaker. I was the one that protected him, and I couldn't protect him, from cancer. And so today it's resurfaced again, huge grief and loss, because I am now caring for my grandson who has been removed from his parents. And so a whole lot of grief. And it keeps resurfacing, just as you said, in different ways. And I'm learning so much about it. And as I'm trying to help him with his needs, I'm also healing in my own losses. And it's a lot of grieving for what I thought life would be for his parents, for myself, for him, because he's suffers from a lot of trauma, FASD.
Wow.
It certainly isn't how. So that's my experience. So there it keeps showing up at this little boy, right? In this little boy who is my brother.
Well, and that's really a powerful awareness for you to have, that you recognize that, and that there is this connection with, because what we're talking about is an emotional attachment to something of value in our life that we love. Mm-hmm. And so that pain doesn't just magically go away. We don't get over it. It's cruel to even suggest such a thing, but we come to terms with it. And really the process is about learning how to live with it and knowing that it's going to get triggered. And so how do I prepare for that so that it doesn't throw me off my foundation, and that I can continue to find a way to move forward to thrive, because we are designed to be able to do that. I wanted to share with you from my book. This is actually a quote from Wikipedia. I thought was a wonderful description of what grief is, because it affects us in so many different levels that we're maybe not even aware of it. And so what Wikipedia says is that it's a multifaceted response to loss, particularly to the loss of someone or something that has died, to which a bond or affection was formed. So I'm sure you can relate to that. Although conventionally focused on the emotional response to loss through a family member or a person that we're connected with, especially, it also has a physical, cognitive, behavioral, social, cultural, spiritual, and philosophical dimension to it. So you can see how it affects every single level, every cell of our being, every aspect of our life. And it's no wonder it throws us off. And we wonder, we may ask ourselves, what's wrong with me? I feel like crying and I don't know why. And you don't recognize that maybe it's something subtle that was triggered. I notice I will have emotion well up when I see a young man that looks like my son just walking down the street. Or I hear of a family that is now newly affected by the loss of life, by especially through the act of violence, where it's just so horrible you don't know how to take it on. But even when you're slowly watching a loved one die, how do we process that and still be present to the reality that we're experiencing now? So when I was contemplating what grief really meant and what it meant to me as I was writing my book, I had this great insight and awareness. Thank you, Evelyn. I forgot to mention my grandson's daddy. My son is now terminally ill with cancer. So there's a repetition of that pain, and that's going to trigger what you've already experienced. So what I want to encourage you to do is to be present to the love that you have and the blessing of the moment of sharing that relationship right now, so that you don't begin to grieve knowing the loss is going to come, but that it takes you out of being present in the moment. Because the relationship we have is still offering you something of value, something that's precious. And and can teach us something when we're open to it. So I want to share with you this insight I had of how grief affects us, and how we begin to realize the depth of it. I wrote, my experience is that grief slowly creeps into every part of us, creeps, infiltrates our thoughts and feelings, it seeps into our emotions, and it crawls into our hearts. It finds its way into every cell of our being, out of our body, and it takes over how it functions. It finds its way into every aspect of our lives, our relationships, how we respond to the world around us, our behaviors, our perception of life on every level. In time, we can't even recognize ourselves as grief has taken up residence in who we are. And maybe you've noticed that you look back and it's like, I'm not the same person. Well, of course you're not the same person, because grief changes us at the core. It changes who we are. We can't be the same person that we were. So if we're trying to do that, if we're trying to scramble to get back to what's familiar, that keeps us in the suffering of not being able to process and move forward. So part of the process of grieving is recognizing what I'm attached to, and what is it that is going to be important for me to release, to transform, because there's a new relationship being created, both in what I lost, what I'm missing, most especially a person that I am emotionally connected with, but also in myself, who I was. I am grieving who I was, and it may stir up anger and guilt and regret and all that stuff, even fear. If we're anticipating, what if I have another loss? How will I ever live through it? See how it can immobilize us and prevent us from moving forward. Those are some of the pits that we can get stuck in. And so one of the things that I came to understand, that I finished writing in this paragraph, is that what I decided is that my option is to make friends with grief. Because we're going to be hanging out with each other for the rest of our life, literally. Maybe that didn't occur to you. I realized it's a lifetime relationship. And so as soon as I could recognize that, and I realized that grief is my friend, it offers me something of value. It's not something to fear or to avoid, because as long as I do that, I am stuck in a pitfall of grief. I am stuck in the place of not being able to move forward, to heal and transform. I am not able to recognize the gift that may be offered to me in the value of feeling deeply, to get to know a part of myself that I may never have known before. And so, though there's this very intense emotional feeling that I recognize grief has taken up residence and added to who I am, I have begun to learn to have some comfort with it, a value of it. And so one of the things that I want to, I'm going to do a screen share here, is for you to see that there's 5 facts about grief that are relevant to what we're experiencing. The reason that we grieve is because we have loved. Would we not want to have experienced love in our life? And so the love that we feel is that the pain of not being able to experience what we're missing. The emotions of grief are normal and natural. So there's nothing wrong with you. It's important to recognize that, to allow yourself to feel them and know that it's a part of our loving experience. And so I want to also remind you that all of this has a very deep effect of your ability to love yourself. Self-love includes being able to find healthy ways to process pain and loss, so that we don't project it out into the world in some way that isn't realistic. Grief is unique to you. It isn't the same. We can't just say that my grief is the same as someone else. So to be very gentle and loving to others, but also to yourself, and to not try to project that, oh, well, I understand because, I've experienced grief. Maybe you have some empathy, but you can't possibly know exactly what someone else is feeling. And the only way out of grief is through it. I'm sorry. We have to have the courage to take it all on. And so that's what we're going to do next month is I'm going to lead you through a practice of having the courage to feel the intensity of it and how do we shift it so that we can heal and help ourselves through it. But ultimately, grief can teach us something about life if we allow it to. There's this quote I wanted to share with you that I think really sums that up, that grief, I've learned, is really just love. Is all the love that you want to give but cannot, including to yourself. All of that unspent love gathers up in the corners of your eyes, the tears, the lump in your throat, and in the hollow part of your chest. Because grief is just love with no place to go. We're trying to find a way to give the love that we had for somebody that we're missing. And and the and the process of beginning to recognize that capacity for love is still there, that hasn't been taken from us. We just have to transform it and maybe share it in new ways. But first and foremost, we have to love ourselves enough to heal, right? And if we can't feel the capacity of love for ourselves, it's going to be very challenging to heal through grief, to be gentle enough to love yourself through the process. So I want to put up this other slide to show you the vast areas that grief can show up as the emotions of pain and loss. And just to take a look at them and to recognize, are you feeling any of that? Can you relate to any of those things? And to know that, see, first of all, if we don't acknowledge and recognize what I'm feeling and give a name to it, then I can't recognize how it may be related to grief and pain and loss and how it's affecting me. So we have to be able to acknowledge it and not feel guilty or ashamed and just call it for what it is. It's an experience of life. You know, if we didn't experience the full spectrum of everything, we would be missing out on the amazing adventure of what we call life. So can we begin to see that this is part of our adventure, to have more of a curiosity of what if I really felt these things and acknowledge them and just sort of as out of curiosity just sort of noticed, what is it about that feeling, what is it offering me? Have you ever been curious about rejection or rage? Experience the outbursts of emotion and not knowing where it's coming from. See, once we recognize it, then we can have more of a healthy way of expressing it and not destructive or project out on others in ways that creates confusion and chaos or bitterness in a relationship. Emptiness, crying is a cleansing tool. Crying allows us to just let all of that flow out. One of the things that I learned is to allow the tears to flow without restriction, without trying to hold them back, without trying to, go, oh, sorry. Just let it the messy, just run down your face into your clothes and just feel the relief of tears. So healing. So I want to shift into talking about then the pitfalls of grief. And we're going to just touch on these areas. And actually there's, it is 5. So anxiety and stress, family traditions, guilt and regret, fear of the future, and moving forward. So we're going to touch on those things and begin to realize that when we see them as pitfalls, we can begin to recognize both the value of what they're offering and how we can move through them. So the first one in anxiety and stress, I just want to check in. Okay, no comments. We already talked about why do we grieve anyway? That we grieve because we have loved. So think about it. Would you want to be somebody that walked around without the capacity to love, to have connection with others, and most importantly, to love yourself, the value of who you are? And so you can celebrate the fact that you have this deep capacity to love, which includes the pain of loss. So, yes, our hearts get broken, right? And in that, we have to give ourselves permission to feel the emotions of grief, the shock, the anger, the regret, the denial. It's like I remember like I said, when I first got that call about my son, it's like my mind went to, no, that couldn't possibly have happened. They made a mistake, right? Or the guilt of, was there something I could have done to have prevented that? And in reality, no. My son was an adult. He was 29 years old. He made choices and had connections, and those that also made choices to be involved with him and make the choice of taking his life. And ultimately, I've had to walk through the judicial system and attend a parole hearing, even of one of the defendants that have come up for parole, um, that are participated in taking my son's life. And that's where forgiveness has come in. But anxiety and stress come from the fear, the loneliness, the disappointment, all the normal and natural feelings that come up, but interfere with our ability to process, to heal, and move forward. So many instances of anxiety and stress experienced are due to perhaps the anticipation and fear of our future without the one that we love. We don't know how to move forward. Have you thought about that, or maybe you've recognized that for you? That although the pain and the absence that you might feel is natural and normal, focusing only on those feelings creates more anxiety and stress. We're not being able to be in the moment of what can I do? What are my options? Is that really affecting me in a negative way? And if we don't address them, they can wreak havoc on our whole mind, body, spirit connection. Those things are like toxic to our body. And so they can manifest in physical ailments. So it's important to process them. For instance, if you have perhaps developed food poisoning, most of us have had that at some point in our life, something that we've eaten. Is it better to hold in the stomach pains and the sick feelings and not let it out? No, we've got to let it process out so that we can release the toxins that have thrown our system out of balance, right? And you'll only feel better and get through the sickness when the bad food is removed. So holding on to it could potentially be fatal. It's the same thing with the energy of pain, of loss. And so anxiety and stress can have a fatal impact on our body through our mental process. So I associate food poisoning analogy with the internal anxiety of stress and how it's associated with grief. Holding on to our feelings only compounds the negative effects. So it's important to take some kind of positive action to release that. Talk to someone, ideally a non-judgmental friend, a spiritual advisor, counselor, therapist, or grief coach. Or maybe you work it out through physical exercise or taking a walk in nature or doing a breathing meditation practice, which we're going to do before we end today. So don't let me forget. So we want to let the pain and the hurt out so that you can make room to receive more love and gratitude and the things that support our wholeness and brings us back to balance, right? Another area that's a pitfall is family traditions. So when holidays and anniversaries and birthdays and those things come up, those are huge triggers for us with grief and loss, especially the first year of the loss of a loved one. And so when that happens, it may interfere with our feeling of how do I continue a family tradition that's important. We might not have the energy or the desire to participate in those things. And maybe we pretend, or maybe we don't do something altogether, and then you feel more bitter and allows us to get more depressed. So it's important to, what I coach people is to know that those things are going to come up, to plan ahead so that the trigger doesn't impact you as more intensely. And so you can make some changes. Maybe you add a new tradition with your family that you incorporate into what you've already done. To invite the presence that you're mourning, the person that you love that you're missing, to be a part of that experience somehow. Or maybe I reduce the number of obligations that I have around, especially the holidays. To not be afraid to acknowledge that trigger in the room, to maybe others aren't comfortable, but to invite them to talk about it anyway. Because once we can start to laugh and share stories, it breaks that energy. And those precious memories can be valuable gifts for us. For me, I always have a special photo of my son. I light a candle of the holidays. His birthday happens to be December 14th. So it kind of compounds that whole December experience for me. I have a special ornament that I hang on the tree that has my favorite picture of him in first grade, and it has it's a little stocking, and it has the year that he died, and I put that on the tree so that I can feel his presence with me. So think about the things that you can incorporate in that add to the tradition, that honor the soul that you're missing, and to remember that this is part of your journey. So if something doesn't feel like you want to participate, have the courage to say, no, I'm not going to do that this year, or I'm not going to participate in that way. If it's going to create anxiety and stress, then remove it. Do as much or as little as you feel, especially during that first year. Really honor yourself and what works for you and what doesn't. If anybody has any comments that they want to put in the chat room too, feel free, and I'll acknowledge them. Guilt and regret is a really big one of the pitfalls of grief. It is so easy for us to fall into those difficult emotions when we're navigating the pain of loss. And getting beyond the should have, if only I had done, I ought to have, why didn't I, takes time and patience and work. So recognize when they come up, because they're not serving you. They might trigger something where this is where I have some work to do, right? Because guilt and regret don't serve a purpose. They only keep us trapped. It's like a toxin. It distracts us, and it prevents us from recognizing the truth and what's important and relevant. So whether these thoughts are rational or not, the feelings are very real though, so they need to be acknowledged so that we can release them. In a very simple way for me is I just say, I now release all guilt and regret, fear, anger, remorse, anything that no longer serves me. I release it from my mind, my body, my soul, so that it can be transformed and healed for greater good. I release it all consciously, intentionally. Thank you for serving me, but I don't need you anymore. Bye-bye. And that's all we have to do. Okay? So as you travel through your grief journey, it's important, I want to keep reminding you to be kind and patient with yourself. Be gentle. There's a lot of self-care involved in the grief process. To just check in with you. What feels right? What do I need? What am I not nurturing myself with? If you had a broken leg, you probably wouldn't say, oh, well, I don't need that cast. It'll heal on its own, right? No, you give something to support your bones so that it can heal. Time and patience to heal and restore. Physical therapy then to strengthen it. So what do you need for your heart, for your mind, for your body, so that you don't get stuck in guilt and regret? Talking to a non-judgmental friend or professional again, but journaling is a great way of releasing that energy, because all the emotions have energy, right? So if I just journal it, it doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't mean you reread it. It doesn't have to have grammar, spelling. You just You just regurgitate everything out on the paper, your anger. And if you need another source to release anger, throwing stones in water, or somewhere where it's not going to hurt something, throwing darts, do something healthy way of releasing that energy. Another pitfall of grief is fear of future. I notice that there's a tendency to want to hold on to, um, and I hesitate to use the word victim, but sometimes we feel like we get it where there's a benefit from telling everybody our story. And if you notice that you continue to repeat your story, um, notice how you're saying it. Is it because it's going to be helpful, or is it because you're looking for sympathy? And so find healthy ways to share, this is what's going on for me. And is it holding me back from moving forward? Because you're not honoring your loved one by not moving forward. Do you think your loved one would want you just to stay in that place of pain and not finding a way to experience life in all its fullness and the beauty of our future? So it's very easy to get trapped in having the fear of that I can't live in the same house, or I can't do the same things, or that you choose something because you feel like I'm not going to honor my loved one if I move on and do something different. Fear of life without the loved one that we mourn can be overwhelming, especially when it's been a spouse, a partner. Loss of a loved one can create fear due to the new responsibilities maybe we have to take on, or loss of income or security, emotional support, companionship, faith. We can lose our sense of faith because of loss. And faith is really is an energetic thing that it is whatever I put my focus on, whatever my core belief is that I put energy into, that's what I have faith in. So do I have faith that I have the capacity, the courage, and the strength to move forward and discover what I need to heal and transform my life? Can I put my faith in that? Self-esteem can take a big hit when we're dealing with pain and loss. So fear of future can affect that. Our sense of belonging. So there's a wide range of things that can affect our fear of the future. Our hopes and our dreams, our expectations of the future could be shattered because of loss. And so everyone has experienced it in some form. And as long as we continue to grow, though, we will experience fear. Somebody, a very wise person, said it's an acronym for false experiences appearing real. So it's putting some kind of evidence in something that's not really real, and staying stuck with that. So if we don't deal with it, it can paralyze us literally. So to move forward, we need to do the grief work to transfer that fear, that doubt, that worry, that uncertainty into confidence, power, peace, and love, self-love. So open your heart to receive the beauty and the miracles and the joy and all the possibilities of the new life that you're claiming and creating moving forward. And real quickly, the last one is moving forward. Remember that actually I wrote about this in my book, and one of the great joys that I had in writing my book is that my older son, who is now 39, when he got a copy of my book, and he texted me really early one morning. He lives 3 hours different. I'm in the Eastern time zone. He's in Pacific time zone. And he said, "Mom, I thought I was just going to go to bed and read a couple chapters." And he said, "I couldn't put it down. At 4 a.m, I finally finished the book." He goes, "Wow, I had no idea the experiences that you've had and what you've done to move forward." And he said, "You've really changed me." And he said, "One of the things that I wrote on the desktop of my computer that came from your book is every day I get to choose, how will I show up? What will I choose to do? So, moving forward from the pain of life is deciding, how am I going to show up? What are my options? What can I do? You know, it's like if you had a flat tire while you're driving, you have two choices. You can change the tire or you can move on, right? You can just stay stuck and do nothing. Is that what we want to do? Is that how we honor ourselves or the love that we moan? No. We choose some action to move forward. What supports me in the best way moving forward? You know, there's an alarming statistic that less than 2% of unresolved grief um, can actually affect every area of our life. So, if we're not processing unresolved grief, it is affecting us some way in some aspect of who we are. So, I want you to consider how you can cherish the memories in your heart of whatever it is that you miss and embrace that as the potential and possibility of your future because they offer you something of value. To make a decision to accept that you cannot change the past, right? So living in that isn't helpful. But your hopes, your dreams, and your expectations may have been shattered, but your life is changed. So, how is it changed for the better? Is there something that value that I can incorporate moving forward that can be meaningful if I allow it, if I am willing to receive it? And that's some of the things we're going to talk about in the next two times that we gather. But before we leave, I want to end with a short meditation. And I'm going to actually turn on some music. Hopefully you can hear some of that. I just would like you to just take a few minutes to close your eyes and to know that when we're processing grief, that it can affect our breathing. So the first place to start in moving forward, to get out of the pitfalls of grief, to experience moving forward, is to learn to breathe again. That if it feels like your heart has stopped and your breathing is inhibited from the shock of a life event or an emotionally charged moment, practice this exercise to restore deep breathing and the vital life force that brings us back to balance and connection of the wisdom within that guides and sustains us, our divine light, divine energy, whatever it is that you may call it. And so wherever you are, if possible, just close your eyes, put aside any distraction, and if you can, turn off phones and all that kind of stuff, but to just close your eyes for a moment and recognize that wherever you're sitting, that is supporting you, is giving you a foundation. If you can have your feet grounded on the floor, your hands open gently on your lap to receive, and begin to focus on your breath, to open your vision to the inner reality by focusing on your breath. Our mind needs something to focus on. So just notice your breathing for a moment. As you're breathing in and you're breathing out. Just see your breath as you breathe in and breathe out. And begin to slow it down, to follow it, breathing in and breathing out. Breathing in and breathing out. Notice how it aligns with the rhythm of your heart. You're aligning with the rhythm of the universe with your breathing. Your breath sustains you. It supports you. It offers you a lifeline. So as you increase the depth of your breathing, allow the inhale breath to expand from your belly and out as far as you can, and hold it for 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. And then gently, slowly exhale your breath, releasing all the air from your belly as it retracts, and again, holding that for 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. And breathing deeply for 3 cycles of that breath, just breathing in and holding it, and exhaling slowly and deeply and holding it. Breathing in, breathing out. Breathing in, breathing out. And one more time, breathing in, and breathing out. And return to your regular breathing, but with an awareness of how your breath is supporting and sustaining your mind, body, and soul connection. Just notice how it feels to breathe and the difference between shallow and deep breathing. Can you see how it feels different in your body? Our goal is to allow the depth of full breathing to support us, to release the energy that no longer serves us. To set the intention to bring your awareness to your breath whenever you feel it restricted or suspended, and to take a deep cleansing breath just to bring in the oxygen and the energy of life that we need to reboot our system. This allows us to be present and ready to listen from within, to hear the wisdom inherently accessible to each of us breathing in this life experience. And so, opening your eyes, I invite you to remember that our breath is the source breathing us back into each moment. And it's so easy to forget the importance of our breathing to embrace life and to claim all the strength and power and vitality that is ours, especially in traumatic life experiences that can blindside us without warning. So, as I bring a close to today's gathering, thank you for being present with me. I want to let you know that if you would like to email me at unravelinggrief@gmail.com, I will send you a handout of the Pitfalls of Grief with some basic supportive information and activities of what you can do to help get out of that pitfall. And also, I will send you the link of my recorded with background music of the breathing exercise. So you can use that to support you whenever you feel restricted, when you feel any kind of emotional that's holding you back, that's triggered by unresolved grief or some pain of some form. And I thank you for joining me, and I look forward to next month. It will be March 12th. I'll meet with you again, and we're going to be doing how to feel to heal, really getting into the intensity of how to transform the pain of grief. So thank you for this time. I appreciate it. And I'm just checking in. Thank you, Philippa and Arlene. My email again, unravelinggrief as one word @gmail.com. I guess I could just do this. Unraveling grief. Oops, I have to spell it right. @gmail.com. There you go. So I look forward to hearing from you, and you can always post in the comments when Mia posts this on the Facebook group too. So thank you for joining me today, and have a really wonderful day, just taking in a deep breath and letting it all support you wherever you're at. Namaste.